Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you a tale of betrayal, truth, and redemption. Emma Harper, a determined granddaughter, uncovers a web of financial deceit within her own family, leading her to challenge everything she once believed. After years of silence, she returns to confront the truth, revealing her family's misdeeds and fulfilling her grandmother's final wishes. This is a story of courage, the search for justice, and the power of standing up for what is right. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's story. I had always thought I understood my family. We were close, or at least I thought we were. We had our disagreements. Of course, no family is without its struggles, but I believed the foundation of our bond was solid. That was until I stepped into my grandmother Margaret's study one spring afternoon, hoping to help with her finances after she had become less able to manage things herself. The sun was shining brightly outside, casting soft rays through the large windows. But inside, my heart was shrouded in something darker. I had been trained as an accountant, so when Margaret asked me to review her financial situation, I thought nothing of it. She had always been so diligent, and I wanted to make sure that everything was in order for her. But what I found was something I had not expected, not by a long shot. It wasn't just a simple mistake or oversight. No, this was something far worse. The financial records were filled with traces of misappropriation, money siphoned from her assets into the businesses of my mother Laura and my sister Rachel, both of which had failed. But what struck me most was the realization that the enormous debts accumulated by these failed ventures were all under my grandmother's name. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read through the numbers, the evidence staring back at me like an ugly truth I could no longer ignore. My mind raced, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be right. Margaret had always been so sharp, so composed. How could she have allowed this to happen? But there, in front of me, were the unmistakable signs that something had gone horribly wrong. "What are you doing?" The voice snapped me out of my thoughts, and I turned quickly to see my mother standing in the doorway, her expression one of curiosity mixed with suspicion. My heart sank. I didn't want to involve her. Not yet. But there was no turning back now. "I'm just checking grandmother's financial situation," I replied, trying to mask the unease in my voice. I had always tried to maintain composure, even when the weight of the world seemed to be bearing down on me. "We're managing mother's assets properly," she said, though there was a noticeable edge to her tone. Her gaze flickered over to the documents on the desk, and I could see the slight twitch in her hand as she clenched it at her side. "Everything is under control." I hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "There are several strange points, especially the financing for your business and Rachel's real estate investment project. Does grandmother really know about these?" The change in my mother's face was instant. A flash of anxiety crossed her eyes, but it was gone so quickly that I almost wondered if I had imagined it. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture. "Of course. Mother said she wanted to support the family business. But both of those businesses had failed, hadn't they? The debt was overwhelming, and Margaret was left to carry it. Something about this felt off. So off that I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far deeper than just a financial oversight." Before I could respond, my mother's voice cut through the silence. "There will be a family meeting tonight. Everyone should attend." Her tone was final, as if she knew there was no point in arguing. I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in her face, but I held it together. Instead, I simply nodded. "I'll be there," I said quietly, though my mind was already racing with the implications of what I had uncovered. That evening, the atmosphere in the Collins family dining room was thick with tension. My father Richard sat at the head of the table, flanked by my mother and sister Rachel on either side. Rachel's husband Jonathan had also joined, though he barely said a word. As usual, Richard cleared his throat before speaking. "Today's meeting is about our family's honor and trust," he declared, his voice booming through the silence that had settled over the room. "It seems Emma has questions about how we manage our assets." I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. But I couldn't back down. Not now. I'm simply pointing out the facts, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. Huge sums of money have flowed from grandmother's assets into your businesses. And all of those businesses have failed. Isn't this clearly misappropriation? Misappropriation. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Barbara's voice trembled with anger. We're managing the assets to protect Mother, she insisted, her eyes flashing with a mix of guilt and defensiveness. We're doing this for the family. Grandmother has early symptoms of dementia. Don't you know? I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Can you say for certain that she truly understood what she was signing? The room went silent. I could see the flash of panic in my mother's eyes as she glanced at my father. Richard's face had turned red with anger. What are you saying? Richard thundered, his voice sharp with authority. I pulled out the documents I had gathered, pointing to the signatures. The evidence indicates so, I said, my heart hammering, especially the signatures from last year. They're clearly different from the ones before. Did someone forge them? The tension in the room was palpable. Diane's face twisted into a sneer. What are you planning, Emma? Do you want to keep grandmother's inheritance all to yourself? No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I just want to protect grandmother. My father slammed his fist on the table. Get out of this house. He spat, his face contorted with rage. You're no longer a member of this family. I froze, the words hitting me harder than anything else could. My father, my flesh and blood, had just disowned me for wanting to protect my grandmother. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply grabbed the single suitcase I had packed and walked out of the house that night, leaving behind everything I had ever known. The Collins family, as I had once thought of it, was gone. 8 years had passed since that night. 8 long years of silence, of hiding, of carefully keeping contact with my grandmother Margaret through her lawyer and a trusted nurse, away from the eyes of the family. The pain of being cast out, of being disowned by the people who should have been my support, had never fully faded, but I had come to terms with it. The world I once knew had collapsed. But in the ruins, I had found a new purpose. It was early one morning when I received the call that would set everything in motion again. The voice on the other end of the phone was calm, professional. This is William Harrison, Eleanor Collins's attorney, he said, his tone respectful but carrying the weight of the news he had to deliver. I have sad news. Eleanor passed away peacefully last night. My heart sank, a heavy ache filling my chest. I had known Margaret's health had been deteriorating, but hearing those words made the finality of it all hit harder than I anticipated. I had not seen her in person for years, but we had spoken through letters, through messages, through whatever means we could find. She had always wanted me to be part of her life, even if my family had kept me away. And now, she was gone. The funeral will be held the day after tomorrow at St. Mary's Church in Boston. Harrison continued, it was Eleanor's strong wish that you attend. The family has been informed. And according to her will, your attendance is essential. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling heavily on my shoulders. After everything that had happened, I hadn't expected to be asked to be there. But now that I knew, I had a promise to keep, to my grandmother. To the truth. I understand, I said quietly. I'll be there. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur. I had spent the years since I left the family building a life for myself. But in the back of my mind, I had always known that this day would come. It was as if I had been preparing for it all this time. The moment I stepped into St. Mary's Church would be the moment the truth was finally revealed. No more secrets. No more lies. 2 days later, I stood in front of the church, dressed in the black mourning attire that felt strangely foreign to me. My steps were steady as I made my way up the stairs. My heart beat faster with every step, but my expression remained calm. I wasn't here to mourn the loss of my grandmother, though I felt her absence deeply. I was here to fulfill the promise I had made to her. I was here to reveal the truth. The moment I stepped through the heavy wooden doors of the church, the atmosphere shifted. The quiet conversations that had filled the air came to an abrupt halt. And all eyes turned toward me. I felt the weight of their stares as I walked down the aisle. But I didn't falter. I had come this far. There was no turning back now. At the front of the church, I saw my family, my mother Laura, my father Richard, my sister Rachel, and her husband Jonathan. They were seated in the family section. Their expressions a mixture of confusion and anger. The shock on their faces was palpable. But there was something else, something more unsettling. It was fear. Barbara's eyes locked with mine. And she immediately stood up, her face contorting with a mixture of rage and disgust. "Why did you come?" she hissed, her voice low but tremulous with emotion. "I wish you had died instead." The words struck me harder than I expected. And for a moment, I hesitated, but then I remembered Margaret. The woman who had always been there for me. The woman who had trusted me with the truth. I was here for her, not for them. I didn't answer. Instead, I continued walking toward the front, ignoring the murmurs of the guests who were now whispering among themselves. Diane stood up next, a cold smile playing on her lips. "Who invited you?" she sneered. "Don't embarrass everyone, you disgrace." It was as if I were walking into a storm of judgment. But I was unmoved. I stopped just before the family, my gaze fixed on my mother and sister. I stood tall, my voice calm and firm, though inside, my emotions were a tangled mess. "I'm not here to pay my respects," I said quietly. "I'm here to reveal the truth." The words hit the room like a stone thrown into water, rippling out in all directions. The color drained from my mother's face, and Diane's grip tightened around Jonathan's arm. Richard stood up, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. "Get out," he said in a low voice, his words dripping with contempt. "This is a family matter. You have no right to be here." But I wasn't leaving, not this time. I had come to fulfill my promise, and nothing would stop me. I took a deep breath and moved forward, knowing that the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The tension in the room was thick, like a weight pressing down on everyone in attendance. My words hung in the air, and as the silence deepened, the eyes of my family bored into me with a mix of anger, fear, and confusion. But this was no longer their story. This was mine, and I had come to see it through to the end. Before anyone could speak, a voice rang out from behind me. "Mr. Richard Collins." We all turned, surprised by the unexpected interruption. William Harrison, my grandmother's lawyer, stood at the center aisle, flanked by another man who seemed every bit as serious as Harrison. The man introduced himself as James Foster, the executor of Margaret's will. "Melissa Collins's attendance has been explicitly requested by the deceased's will," Harrison said calmly, his voice firm but respectful. "Any attempt to remove her would be contrary to the deceased's final wishes." Richard's hand faltered, still halfway in the air as if to physically throw me out. His face flushed with frustration. But there was nothing he could do. Harrison's words had set the course in motion. "Sit down, Richard," Barbara said tightly, her voice now quiet, though no less venomous. She knew there was no escaping this. The truth was about to unfold. Diane, too, exchanged a look with Jonathan, her expression full of suspicion. The funeral service continued in strained silence. I had sat far from the family, in a seat that was not mine by birthright but was necessary for the task I had come to complete. My eyes occasionally found their way to my grandmother's coffin, where I sent a silent prayer and apology. I had done all I could to protect her, to keep her legacy intact. As the service ended, the guests began to file out, their whispers still loud enough to reach me. But I didn't flinch. I was no longer the person they had cast out all those years ago. I was standing in my own truth. I walked toward the small conference room where the will reading was scheduled. As we entered, the room's heavy wooden table and dim lighting seemed to amplify the tension in the air. Harrison and Foster took their seats. And soon, my parents and sister filed in, their expressions now tight and defensive. I could feel their eyes on me, but I refused to look away. The will reading was about to begin. Foster opened the first page of the document and began in a solemn tone. I, Margaret Adelaide Collins, being of sound mind, do hereby declare my final will. He paused briefly, then continued, detailing the formalities and legal language that came with such a reading. But then came the moment we had all been waiting for. I hereby donate 70% of my total assets to the Silver Defenders Foundation. Foster continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. This foundation works to prevent financial abuse of the elderly. A cause close to my heart. The shock in the room was palpable. My family visibly recoiled, their faces a mixture of disbelief and guilt. But none of them spoke. Additionally, Foster continued, I bequeath 25% of my assets to my granddaughter, Melissa Elizabeth Collins. I could feel the weight of the room's gaze shift to me. And though I remained calm on the outside, my heart beat faster. For years, I had feared I would never see this moment. That the family would take everything from me. That my grandmother's wishes would be silenced by lies and greed. But now, the truth was coming to light. Margaret's love and belief in me had not wavered. The tension was thick as Foster went on, revealing the details of the will. The remaining 5% shall be equally divided among my daughter, Laura Collins, granddaughter Rachel Harris, and son-in-law Richard Collins. A gasp came from Diane, and before she could speak, Barbara rose to her feet. This is unacceptable, she cried, her face twisting with rage. There must be some mistake. Sit down, Barbara, Harrison said sharply. His voice was unyielding. We are not finished yet. Barbara sank into her seat, the rage in her eyes still burning. I appoint Melissa Elizabeth Collins as the executive of this will. Foster read aloud. She is given full authority to manage my estate and execute the distribution of assets as outlined above. The room fell into stunned silence. My father's hands trembled, his composure faltering. I will legally contest this, he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. Eleanor's judgment was impaired in her later years. He added, trying to justify their actions. Actually, Richard, I spoke up, my voice cutting through the tension. Grandmother's mental state was confirmed by regular evaluations from multiple physicians. At the time the will was created, she was fully competent to make decisions. I paused, looking directly at him, my gaze steady. You manipulated her, and now you will face the consequences. The silence that followed was suffocating. And I knew that it was only just beginning. My family, once so confident in their control, now found themselves in the grips of a truth they could no longer deny. But there was more to come. Harrison took out another envelope. The final piece of the puzzle. There is a supplement to the will, he announced. A chill ran through the room as he opened the envelope and began to read a letter Margaret had written just a week before her passing. To my beloved family, he began, his voice growing somber. By the time this letter is read, I will no longer be in this world. However, I cannot leave without revealing the truth that has weighed heavily on my heart. 8 years ago, my granddaughter Melissa discovered that the family was misappropriating my assets. She tried to tell me, but was prevented by the rest of the family and driven from the house. Barbara shot up from her chair, her face contorted with rage. That's a lie, she screamed. But it was too late. The truth had already been spoken, and nothing could undo the damage done by their deceit. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the truth was undeniable, and my family's lies came to light. The months that followed were filled with legal battles. But I remained focused on the promise I had made to my grandmother. The charges of fraud and embezzlement were not easily ignored. And as my family faced the consequences of their actions, I began to heal. The once fractured family was now broken beyond repair. But in its place, something new was taking shape. The Eleanor Collins Foundation, born from my grandmother's vision, became a beacon of hope for the elderly, helping to prevent the financial abuse that had once threatened her legacy. It was a cause I took to heart. And as I stood on the veranda of the newly opened center, I could feel her presence. Proud of what we had achieved, my relationship with my mother slowly began to mend. Though it would take time. I knew there would be no easy fixes. No quick resolutions. But the important thing was that we were starting the process. Learning from the past. And facing the truth. Something we had all failed to do for far too long. As I looked out at the fall-colored garden, I whispered to the sky, "Grandma, I kept my promise. The truth had been revealed. And now I could move forward, knowing I had honored her memory and built something lasting. Something meaningful." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more life stories. Stay tuned for more inspiring journeys and lessons learned along the way.